Krishna Krishna.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraye Nashtaprayeshu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Ruttamaśloke Bhaktirvavati Naistiki Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjanasharakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayyam Dadati Svapadantikam Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shrivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna. Reading from Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. By His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. We are reading from Canto 3, Chapter 15, Description of the Kingdom of God. So now we are hearing the description of the Kingdom of God, that is the Vaikuṇṭha Loka. And here we see the description. Now we are entering the Vaikuṇṭha Loka and Bhagavan Shabda Gochara. Yeah, please continue. Text 15.
Text 15. In the Vaikuṇṭha planets is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the original person and who can be understood through the Vedic literature. He is full of uncontaminated mode of goodness, with no place for passion or ignorance. He contributes religious progress for the devotees. Purport: the kingdom of the Supreme Personality of Godhead in the spiritual sky cannot be understood by any process other than hearing from the description of the Vedas. No one can go see it. In this material world also, one who is unable to pay to go to a far distant place by motorized conveyances can only understand about that place from the authentic books. Similarly, the Vaikuṇṭha planets in the spiritual sky are beyond this material sky. The modern scientists who are trying to travel in space are having difficulty going even to the nearest planet, the moon. To say nothing of the highest planets within the universe. There is no possibility that they can go beyond the material sky themselves, the spiritual planets, Vaikuṇṭha. Therefore, the kingdom of God in the spiritual sky can be understood only through the authentic descriptions of the Vedas and Puranas. In the material world, there are three modes of material qualities: goodness, passion, and ignorance. But in the spiritual world, there is no trace of the mode of passion and ignorance. There is only the mode of goodness, which is uncontaminated by any tinge of ignorance or passion. In the material world, even if a person is completely in goodness, he is sometimes subject to be polluted by tinges of the modes of ignorance and passion. But in the Vaikuṇṭha world, the spiritual sky, only the mode of goodness in its pure form exists. The Lord and his devotees reside in the Vaikuṇṭha planets, and they are of the same transcendental quality, namely Shuddha Sattva, the mode of pure goodness. The Vaikuṇṭha planets are very dear to the Vaishnavas, and for the progressive march of the Vaishnavas toward the kingdom of God, the Lord himself helps his devotees. Hare Krishna.
So Bhagavan, in the Vaikuṇṭha planets, there is the original personality of Godhead, Bhagavan Shabda Gochara. So very, very beautiful description here. The word beautiful, Shabda Gochara, means can be understood only through the Vedic literature. He is the Bhagavan Shabda Gochara. He is full with Sattvam Vishtabhya Virajam Swanam. So he is full with pure goodness, Shuddha Sattva, with no tinge of passion or ignorance. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada says, to hear the transcendental description of the kingdom of God, one has to understand that process. One has to understand only from the process of hearing from the bona fide source. And here we are hearing from the Vedas, and only such place when can get the actual description. The Vaikuṇṭha planets are beyond the material sky. Material sky consists of the material world, material universes, multiverse theory. There are multiple universes, Ananta Koti Brahmandas. Beyond that, there is the spiritual sky. And there is no possibility of the material by mechanical means one can reach the spiritual sky. Prabhupada says here, what to speak of the spiritual sky, scientists are finding it so difficult even to reach to the nearest planet, that is Moon. The next target is Venus. Next to that is, one after another. But the distances are so high that it is impossible to reach to that place. So one can reach to the spiritual sky, right, sitting in the material world, through Shabda Brahma, Shabda Gocharaha, through the sound vibration. Material world is filled with material qualities, goodness, passion, and ignorance. But in the spiritual world, there is no passion and ignorance. There is only goodness, and it is uncontaminated goodness, Shuddha Sattva. Srila Prabhupada says, material world, it is very difficult to see the Shuddha Sattva. Somebody may be purely in the mode of goodness, but at times there is the contamination of Rajoguna and Tamoguna, always a chance of taking over Sattvaguna, or at least contaminating Sattvaguna. Just like we see that Brahmaji's pastime, where it's contaminated by Rajoguna sometimes, or sometimes by Tamoguna, so on and so forth. But in the spiritual world, it is Shuddha Sattva, completely in the mode of goodness, and therefore the Vaikuṇṭha planets are extremely dear to devotees. Yat Vaishnavanam Priyam. And Lord is also always eager to get his devotees back home, back to Godhead, and thus he will always help his devotees by being situated in the hearts of the devotees. Text 16. Yatra naishreyasam nama vanam kama dughair drumaihi sarvatru shribhir vijrat kaivalyam ivamurtimat. Translation.
In those Vaikuṇṭha planets, there are many forests which are very auspicious. In those forests, the trees are desired trees, and in all seasons they are filled with flowers and fruits, because everything in the Vaikuṇṭha planets is spiritual and personal. Purport: in the Vaikuṇṭha planets, the land, the trees, the fruits and flowers and the cows, everything is completely spiritual and personal. The trees are desired trees. On this material planet, the trees can produce fruits and flowers according to the order of material energy, But in the Vaikuṇṭha planets, the trees, the land, the residents, and the animals are all spiritual. There is no difference between the tree and the animal or the animal and the man. Here, the word Murtimat indicates that everything has a spiritual form. Formlessness, as conceived by the impersonalists, is refuted in this verse. In the Vaikuṇṭha planets, although everything is spiritual, everything has a particular form. The trees and the men have form, and because all of them, although differently formed, are spiritual, there is no difference between them. Hare Krishna.
Now, there is a description of Vaikuṇṭha planet. In the Vaikuṇṭha planet, there are many forests, and which are all auspicious. They are filled with the trees, which are Kalpavriksha trees, the desire trees, and everything in the spiritual planet is spiritual and personal. Murtimat. So the word Murtimat is being stressed here. Very, very personal, very spiritual. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada says, in the Vaikuṇṭha planets, the lands, the trees, the fruits, flowers, cows, everything there is completely spiritual and very, very personal. The trees there are desire trees. The land there is Chintamani. So there is a beautiful verse in Brahma Samhita. Chintamani prakara sadma sukalpa vriksha laksha vriteshu surabhira vipalayantam Lakshmi sahasrashata sambrama sevyamanam Govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami. The land there is made up of Chintamani land, Chintamani stone, and it's personal. And that's why even actually nothing is impersonal, it's personal. That's why even here, when we get down every day in the morning, before touching our feet to the ground, we beg pardon from Bhudevi and we chant that verse. Samudravasane Devi, Parvatastana Mandale, Viṣṇu Patni Namastubhyam, Padasparsham Kshamasvame. So this is very, very personal. Right. Similarly, the trees are Kalpavriksha trees. Prabhupada says here that generally the trees will give the specific fruit in the season. Like now the summer is coming, everybody will be waiting for the mangoes. So the mango tree in the material world will only give the mango fruit in the season, right? But in the spiritual world, that is not the case. Spiritual world, you can go to the mango tree and ask for lemon, and lemon will come. Or you can ask for, any tree can give any fruit and all at all the times. Not only fruits, all desires can be fulfilled by such desire trees. And therefore, they are called as Kalpavriksha. Similarly, the case with the cows, with the fruits, the flowers. In fact, Prabhupada says there is no difference between the tree, animal, or a man in the spiritual world. Here we see the distinction, but in the spiritual world, there is no distinction. And that's why you will see that in Little Krishna series, that the Lord Krishna is talking with the birds, and then with the calves and the cows, and they are also talking back. You can see that there is a beautiful pastime of the cow being attacked by a lion, and then the cow says, no, let me go back to my calf. The calf is very, very newly born. And so there is no difference between the personalities there. Everything is conscious. And therefore, Prabhupada says the word used here is Murtimat. Murtimat means everything has a spiritual form. This formlessness exists only in the minds of the Mayavadis. Otherwise, nothing is formless. In fact, the Mayavadis are very prone to give this analogy. Just like the drop of water enters the ocean and merges into the ocean, similarly, you will merge in the Brahman. This is their very famous analogy. But now the modern science has proved even the drop of the water within the ocean retains its individuality. Right? Nothing is formless, nothing is impersonal. Right? And nothing is vacant. So Srila Prabhupada writes here, in the Vaikuṇṭha planets, everything is spiritual and everything has a particular form. Trees and the men, they have form because all of them are spiritual in nature and there is no difference between them. And this is very important to understand because, the Swarupa in the spiritual world is the Swarupa. Many times, devotees feel, in the spiritual world, Prabhuji, I either want to be a Gopa either best I want to be a gopi only. If not gopi, then at least I should be a gopa in the spiritual world. Because they make the distinction that the gopa and the gopi are lesser than the tree or lesser than, something like a grass. But our Acharya, one who is the predominant Acharya, Madhavendra Puri. Madhavendra Puri is considered as a Kalpavriksha tree in the spiritual world. Right? So there is no distinction. The inferior, superior, that duality of distinction exists in the material world, doesn't exist in the spiritual world. And now this is the land where Lord Krishna is calling all of us. And what facilities will be provided? They are here. Text 17, beautiful verse. Vaimanika salalanas charitani shashvat gayanti yatra shamalakshapanani bharatuhu antarjaler nuvikasatam madhumadhavinam gandena khandita dhiyopya anilam kshipantah. Translation.
In the Vaikuṇṭha planets, the inhabitants fly in their airplanes, accompanied by their wives and consorts, and eternally sing the character and activities of the Lord, which are always devoid of all inauspicious qualities. While singing the glories of the Lord, they deride even the presence of the blossoming Madhavi flowers, which are fragrant and laden with honey. Purport: it appears from this verse that the Vaikuṇṭha planets are full of all opulences. There are aeroplanes in which the inhabitants travel in the spiritual sky with their sweethearts. There is a breeze carrying the fragrance of blossoming flowers, and this breeze is so nice that it also carries the honey of the flowers. The inhabitants of Vaikuṇṭha, however, are so interested in glorifying the Lord that they do not like the disturbance of such a nice breeze while they are chanting the Lord's glories. In other words, they are pure devotees. They consider glorification of the Lord more important than their own sense gratification. In the Vaikuṇṭha planets, there is no question of sense gratification. To smell the fragrance of a blossoming flower is certainly very nice, but it is simply for sense gratification. The inhabitants of Vaikuṇṭha give first preference to the service of the Lord, not their own sense gratification. Serving the Lord in transcendental love yields such transcendental pleasure that, in comparison, sense gratification is counted as insignificant. Hare Krishna.
In the Vaikuṇṭha planets, the inhabitants fly in their aeroplanes. So Vaimanika, flying in their aeroplanes, Salalana, along with their wives and the consorts, and eternally sing the character and the activities of the Lord. How are these activities? Which are devoid of the inauspicious qualities. See, the material glorification and spiritual glorification. In the material glorification, there will be a tinge of suffering and there will be a tinge of inauspiciousness. India won against Australia. So for India to win, Australia has to lose, right? So there is inauspiciousness even in the winning because somebody has lost. That is not the case with the glories of the Lord. It is all auspicious for everyone, right? While singing the glories of the Lord, they deride even the presence of the blossoming Madhavi flowers, which are fragrant and laden with the honey. So as soon as you enter the Vaikuṇṭha planet, first thing you will be awarded is your own aeroplane, right? So Vaimanika, what a life. The Lord's proposal here is give up this dukkhalayam ashashvatam. Of course, one has to do one's varna and ashrama duties very, very carefully. Otherwise, one will be escapism. We cannot escape the material world. But the contrast here is there is a constant trouble and suffering in the material world, whereas there is a constant happiness position of the living entity. There, the Vaimanikas, the Vaikuṇṭha planets, they are full of all the opulences. The inhabitants travel there in the spiritual sky in the aeroplanes along with their sweethearts. Prabhupada writes. And sometimes there will be a breeze carrying the beautiful aroma of the different flowers, such as the Madhavi flowers. And they will consider this also as disturbance in their service to the Supreme Lord. Although their consorts and the wives are extremely beautiful, but still, because they are so attracted to Krishna and the devotional service, there is no question of sense gratification. Srila Prabhupada writes here, the inhabitants of the Vaikuṇṭha, their first preference is the service of the Lord. And the sense gratification, even within the service of the Lord, is considered very insignificant. Later, we'll see that in Nectar of Devotion, there is beautiful pastime of Daruka, and he is fanning the Supreme Lord in Dwaraka. He is the personal associate of the Lord. And while watching the beauty of the Lord, there are tears. They are constantly flowing from his eyes, and suddenly he becomes aware that he's crying tears, looking at the beautiful beauty of the Supreme Lord, and he condemns his tears. He says that, oh, these tears are coming in my devotional service, and therefore these tears are condemned. So there is, so this is the beautiful description of Vaikuṇṭha planets. Now we have seen what the residents of Vaikuṇṭha are. Now we will see how the other atmosphere in the Vaikuṇṭha. Text 18. Paravatanyabhrutasarasa chakravaka datyutaham sashukati tirar hinam yaha kolahalo viramate ucchair bringadipe harikathamiva gayamane. Beautiful, beautiful verse this is. Translation.
When the king of the bees hums in high pitch, singing the glories of the Lord, there is a temporary lull in the noise of the pigeon, the cuckoo, the crane, the chakravak, the swan, the parrot, the partridge, and the peacock. Such transcendental birds stop their own singing simply to hear the glories of the Lord. Purport. This verse reveals the absolute nature of the Vaikuṇṭha. There is no difference between the birds there and the human residents. The situation in the spiritual sky is that everything is spiritual and variegated. Spiritual variegatedness means that everything is animate. There is nothing inanimate. Even the trees, the ground, the planets, the flowers, the birds, and the bees are all on the travel of Krishna consciousness. The special feature of Vaikuṇṭha Loka is that there is no question of sense gratification. In the material world, even an ass enjoys his sound vibration, but in the Vaikuṇṭha, such nice birds as the peacock, the chakravak, and the cuckoo prefer to hear the vibration of the glories of the Lord from the bees. The principles of devotional service, beginning with the hearing and chanting, are very prominent in the Vaikuṇṭha world.
So in the Vaikuṇṭha world, there are amazing birds. And here, their names cannot be translated, like the trees also will come. These birds and the trees, they have no equivalence in the English. So Prabhupada writes, as it is, chakravaka, swan, parrots, crane, cuckoo, peacocks, all of them, and they are engaged. There is a kolahala, but suddenly there will be a bee who is in a very high pitch singing the glories of the Lord, Harikathamiva. And then Gayamane, because as soon as the bee appears, all the birds, there is a lull there. They fall silent and want to hear the glories being sung by the bee. And what the bee is singing? Zzz. And the birds, they're very happy hearing this sound vibration. Okay. And the purport Srila Prabhupada says, this verse reveals the absolute nature of Vaikuṇṭha. In the Vaikuṇṭha, there is no difference between the birds and the human residents. Look at this, right? There is no difference between the birds and the human residents. Bhagavatam being spoken is by Shukadeva Goswami, who is the Shuka bird, who is the pet parrot of Radharani. Shuka and Sari. And when the Shuka bird of the spiritual world, Vaikuṇṭha, comes to the material world, he becomes Shukadev Goswami and narrates Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, the crest jewel of all Vedic literatures. Right. So there is no difference between the birds and the human residents in the Vaikuṇṭha world. Atmosphere is there is surcharged with spirituality and great variegatedness. There is no emptiness anywhere. Right. There is no emptiness. It is not that things are empty there. There is only light and there is only bright light. No, bright light is there, but there is much more than the bright light. Right. Prabhupada says here, everything is animate in the Vaikuṇṭha world. Even the trees, they are also animated. Just like there is in the Little Krishna serial, there is a beautiful description of, beautiful picture of, when Lord Krishna is playing on the flute, this tree is dancing. Anybody remembers that? Beautiful dance of the tree is being depicted there.
Yes.
And that is the reality. That is the animated nature of the spiritual world. The special feature of the Vaikuṇṭha is that there is no question of sense gratification. Not because there is a dearth of sense gratification, because it is so very third class compared to what is available. Right. Like, sometimes you migrate from one place to another and, something like that. You just increase the standard of your living, or you receive something very, very higher in your life. The lower taste is very easy to give up. You don't endeavor to give up the lower taste. Right. Vishaya vinivartante niraharasya dehina rasovarjam rasopyasya param drishtva nivartate. So in the spiritual world, because there is such an amazing positive pleasure available, therefore the Vishaya vinivartante becomes very easy to give up. In fact, that is not an endeavor at all. Prabhupada says here, in the material world, people are mad after sense gratification. So much so, even the ass will like to hear his own sound. Whatever the ass sound is, he will sing, oh, how nicely I'm singing. But the sense gratification is completely absent. So all these great birds like Chakravaka and Cuckoo and the peacock, swans, parrots, although they are singing the Lord's glories in beautiful sound and beautiful meter and beautiful voice, very, very melodious. But as soon as this bee comes in, who is simply buzzing in a very high pitch and singing the glories of the Lord, Harikathami Vagayamane, Bringadipate, all the birds, their kolahala becomes silent and they are hearing the beautiful, the melodious singing of this bee, which is simply a high pitch glories of the Supreme God. So this is the principle of devotional service, which begins with hearing and chanting. And this hearing and chanting, they are very prominent in the Vaikuṇṭha world. And therefore, Prabhupada used to say this, by chanting, what you want to achieve by chanting? By chanting, we want to achieve more chanting. So how we approach our chanting the holy names? When we are chanting the holy names, is our approach is, kuch to karke fatak se ye 16 mala khatam kar dena hai? Then what we will do in the spiritual world? Right. Therefore, whatever level of advancement we are in, we may be chanting 8 rounds, 10 rounds, 16 rounds, we are initiated, whatever level of advancement we are in, we have to delight in the spiritual activities. Right. We have to delight in the spiritual activities, not that we want to just somehow throw off the spiritual activities so that we can get into our real activity of reading the newspaper, watching cricket match, or, being on the Facebook or WhatsApp or something like that. No. Of course, currently with our advancement, the content of the spiritual activity may be lower in our life. We may be engaged in 2 hours of japa, half an hour of reading, and then some seva here and there, as our time, place, circumstances, age appropriate. But whatever we are doing, we have to do it with great absorption. Sometimes devotees, they leave their rounds for the next day. And, sometimes the things become so heavy in our life that, our chanting is postponed to the next day chanting. But this should be avoided. Right? This should be avoided. Whenever we are chanting, somehow, something, it is not the criteria. We have to delight in our spiritual activities. This is very important. We are not the material being having spiritual experience. We are the spiritual beings reviving our spiritual nature by the transcendental Vaikuṇṭha activities of hearing and chanting. And Prabhupada says these are very prominent in the Vaikuṇṭha world. So these are the beautiful descriptions of the Vaikuṇṭha. Tomorrow we'll recite all these shlokas. So we will conclude here and continue tomorrow. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Gaura Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Thank you, Prabhupada. Thank you, everyone. Hare Krishna.
Thank you,
Thank you, Prabhupada. Thank you, Prabhuji. Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhupada. Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhupada. Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhupada. Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.